We are joined by our correspondent Eben Mabunda, and he is going to analyze for us the predicted weather patterns. A very good evening to you, Eben.
Good evening, Samantha.
Oh, yes, please go ahead and analyze for us these weather patterns.
Now, to start with, perhaps on a lighter note, El Nino basically means little boy. It's actually a Spanish term, but when it is then expanded, the term is actually El Nino de Navidad, speaking to the period of its occurrence, which then means the little boy, the little Christmas boy rather. And this perhaps gives us an indication of when it is that this El Nino is actually expected. That's around the period of Christmas, December, particularly where it is that we have got a planting period. Now, I just want us to take a look at some of the stats and some of the graphics to give us a brighter perspective of what actually happens. I'll start off from a scientific perspective. So in essence, what you've got is a scenario where in Pacific regions, particularly in the equatorial spaces, you've got under normal conditions, winds blowing from the Americas toward parts of Australia as well as parts of Asia. But during El Nino induced conditions, you've got that process sort of reversed with the winds blowing in an opposite direction, that's in an eastern direction, and with that the movement of warm waters that are at the surface of the Pacific moving in a different direction. That now means against the direction of the Australian Asia toward the Americas. But perhaps that may sound a little bit complicated and a little bit more bulky to actually digest. I'll move on perhaps to the lighter side in terms of what this means. You would find that according to experts, the El Nino, which periodically happens anytime between 2 to 7 years, with the last one having been experienced between 2015 and 2016, with effects experienced right through 2017. Now, of course, you are looking at the map of Africa, and from that particular graphic, you can see that dry winds are expected to move from the ocean toward the land, creating dry and warmer conditions, especially on the southern sides of the continent, particularly on the eastern side of southern Africa. And of course, you can expect dry and warm conditions experienced in those particular regions. Now, when you look at the 2015-2016 stats, you would find that about 40 million people were affected and were declared to be food insufficient, especially in Southern Africa, affecting about 10 out of the 15 countries in this particular region. There was a grain deficit of about 8 million tons of grain, of course, particularly cereals which are consumed in the greater parts of Southern Africa. And this perhaps gives us an insight in terms of what it is that we can expect as we get into the 2023-2024 agricultural season. And of course, there we are looking at visuals of the map of Zimbabwe from region 1 moving right up to region 5, with of course the green and the yellow regions being the regions 1 and regions 2, which predominantly sustain the food ecosystem or value chains of Zimbabwe. And there are expectations that with the El Nino expected to come through in the latter parts of 2023, we can actually expect less rainfall to be experienced in region 1, where you've got the eastern highlands and parts of Mazoe that also come through in that particular bracket. And so with that, the next question then becomes how to mitigate against some of these processes as they actually come through. I'm looking at a graphic, of course, that indicates the provinces, the regions from region 1 right up to region 3. But just to speak to the mitigation measures that would be important and crucial to the development of this particular narrative, there would be need for the planting of the planting of crops that are drought resistant. There would be need for sufficient irrigation mechanisms mechanisms to be in place, and perhaps also the storage of grains. You would of course be conversant with the fact that Zimbabwe had a bumper harvest in 2022, 2023. That's in as far as the agriculture season is actually concerned. So perhaps this is now the time to dig into some of what was stored from that particular harvest, and of course that degree of awareness to ensure that all forms of livestock are actually catered for. In the 2015-2016 El Nino, about 700,000 livestock were actually lost across Southern Africa, and so there would be need for adequate and necessary mitigation measures to deal with this looming and imminent threat. Samantha.